My name is Sean Boone, and I'm a product manager at Tableau, where I focus on the core visual analytics capabilities in the product. And in that role, I get to work alongside a development team that is just truly humbled and inspired by the creative works that all of you and the larger Tableau community produce. And just to get one plug in here for an upcoming feature, we can't wait to see what you will do with the new Mark's animation feature next year. I hope you all got to see that in the Devs on Stage session earlier this week. And again, we can't wait to see what you'll do with that. So this session is all about creative possibilities. And for this session, we have not just one, but two phenomenal creators that also happen to be twin brothers, the Fleur-Liz twins. First up, we have Ken. Ken, sorry. I have no idea how hard it was to prepare going between between these two individuals and all their works. Ken is a Tableau Zen master with nearly 20 years of experience in information technology. He works at Bucknell University as the Assistant Director of Business Intelligence, where he's responsible for the design and architecture of data warehousing and analytic solutions across all the functional areas of the university. Ken began using Tableau in 2016. And if you check out his site, he has great examples for building everything from Sankey diagrams, hex scatter plots, ternary charts, and much more. And he is responsible for one of the most beautiful and impactful vizzes that I've ever seen, which is the Killing Fields viz that chronicles the crisis of rhino poaching in Africa. And then we have his twin brother, Kevin. Kevin is also an accomplished Tableau blogger and is a Tableau ambassador. He's currently a senior analyst and Tableau developer for Unifund CCR in Cincinnati, where he is also the co-leader for the Cincinnati Tug. He is placed in the top 10 in 4 of the 5 Tableau Iron Viz feeders for 2018 and 2019. Maybe there's some silver rivalry stuff going on here a little bit. And is number 4 on all-time most favorite list of authors on Tableau Public. Kevin has built incredible vizzes. What's that?
It's number 2.
Yeah. Covered everything.
I'm coming after you, Ken.
Lighter subjects such as the NFL and Dr. Seuss's The Lorax to heavier topics such as the African water crisis. And on his blog, you will find the incredibly useful Tableau chart catalog where he's compiled 100 different visualization types that you can build with Tableau from 74 different authors in the community. So, and if you get the opportunity to head over to the Viz Gallery, check out his collaboration with Lindsay Betzendahl on the Cheetah's Race for Survival. So, as we close out a fantastic week here at TC, let's give a big welcome to the Fleur-Liz twins, Kevin and Ken. Take it away, gentlemen.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it.
All right. So, thank you all for coming today. We know it's last day. We want to make this fun, so let's just try to relax and have a good time here. So, one of the first questions that we always get, yes, we are identical twin brothers. One of the first questions we always get is whether or not we can read each other's minds, and the answer is yeah.
Of course.
Of course. The next question we get, and Sean kind of alluded to this, is whether or not we're competitive. And we're not really competitive at all for the most part. So
yeah, we are. So I don't know about him, but I'm very competitive. And ever since I started using Tableau, I've been tracking our favorites on Tableau Public. See Ken on the left, number 2, me, number 4. And so he's been using it a little bit longer than me. He has a few extra favorites, not many. And but I'm kicking his butt in favorites per viz, the most on one viz. He's got a handful of more than with 25 plus. But probably the most important thing, I mean, who's more handsome?
All right, well, we are not here to talk about who's most handsome. We're not even here to talk about who has the most favorites. We're here to talk about going beyond show me in Tableau. So before we get started, before we jump in, put down your notepads, put down your laptops, no need to take notes. Everything is right here on these 2 blog sites. Take a picture, write it down, and you'll have all the references, all the material you need to go through this again. We have a lot of content today, but we want to make this fun, interactive. So if you see something that is exciting, don't just sit there and stare at us. Come on, let us know, and we'll feed off your energy. So, and hopefully we can make it a little bit fun along the way. So, all right, so why are you here? What we're hoping is that you've been using Tableau for a good period of time, and you love how easily and quickly you can create some really beautiful and powerful and insightful visualizations. But if you're like me, you've reached a point where there are some things you want to do outside of Tableau that aren't just really sort of the standard chart types. And that's what our goal is here today. And so a quick agenda, what we want to do is go a little bit through what we mean when we talk about going beyond Show Me, and a little bit of history of how we came to this. And then along the way, we're going to teach the fundamentals of how to build custom charts in Tableau. And we're going to do that by showing you actually how to build a handful of charts. But the goal is to arm you with the tools you need to then take those techniques and then go do different things when and if it makes a lot of sense at work or in your personal projects or whatever. Sound good? All right, so everyone's familiar with this guy, right? The Show Me panel. Lots of sort of standard charts. But as I said before, there comes a point where sometimes you just want to do something a little bit different, right? Something outside of this. And it can be a little bit of a struggle to figure out how to build those more custom charts. So I actually had that exact same situation. My kids were learning about the periodic table, and I thought, well, it would be really cool if I could build an interactive periodic table so you could hover and use Tableau's interactivity to learn more about the elements. But looking at this Show Me, I just couldn't figure out how in the world you could plot something like that using any of these charts, right? But then I had this I call it my aha moment. And this was a few months into using Tableau that I kind of made this discovery, and it really opened up a whole new world to me of what I could build in Tableau. So let me sort of walk you through and talk about what this discovery was. So I'm going to take this periodic table and I'm going to put it on a grid like this. And you can see that all the elements fit nicely into one of these little blocks on the grid. And if we go back to high school math, we can put an X and Y axis on it like this. And then you see that each of these elements can be assigned an X and Y coordinate, just like high school math class when we're plotting points on an X and Y coordinate and drawing lines and those kinds of things, right? So what I did is I sat down and went through each and every element and created a spreadsheet that recorded my X and Y coordinates, something like this, right? With that, we were then able to use a scatter plot to build this. So I'm just going to show you how this is done. So we're going to connect to the spreadsheet real quick, the periodic table data. All right, so flip over to sheet. We're going to drag our X measure up to columns, our Y measure to rows. And because we're aggregating all the marks, we just get one single mark that sort of sums them all up. So I'm going to take name and put it on detail, and then we get an individual mark for each one of those elements. So you can start to see it coming together now. Let's change this to a square mark shape. Increase its size so they fit together a little bit better. I'm going to take the type, and we're going to drag that onto color here in a moment. We'll hide that legend so we can see the full thing here. Put symbol on label, and then we'll fiddle around with the formatting a little bit, center it, make it a little bit bigger and bolder, and center it. And we have a periodic table, right? So this is the end result. I was super happy with it, but more importantly is, this was a revelation for me. I mean, I was at a point where I was thinking, I need to like learn D3 or something like that in order to build custom charts. But when I realized that if we can figure out the X and Y coordinates, we can draw anything in Tableau. There's no limit to what you can build in Tableau if you can just figure out those X and Y coordinates, right? So this was a revelation, and I was super excited, and then went off and did a whole bunch of things from there and haven't looked back. But in this case, this was a very manual process. I had to sit down and manually go through each and every element and figure out what those x and y coordinates are. And that's not always something that can really be done. Sometimes you need a little bit more automation in that process. And that's where we introduce math. So particularly geometry and trigonometry. So don't get nervous about the trig. Kevin's going to take you through in some detail here. But I just want to give you sort of a quick picture of what we can do with trig. So I've taken a data set that has 100 points, 100 rows, and I've used trig, basic trig, cosine, and sine to plot them all around a circle. So just evenly spacing them around a circle. And this uses the circle mark type, as you can see. Of course, in Tableau, we have different mark types, so if I change it to a line, we get a filled line, and there might be some use cases for drawing a circle like this, I don't know, right? We can also change it to a polygon, so I've just made it into a filled gray little polygon here. So I'm gonna take it and sort of throw it down in the left-hand corner, and then I'm gonna start layering on some additional polygons, all being drawn by figuring out trigonometry, figuring out the trig to draw the circle around the edge. And if we let it go long enough, we've just used trig and Tableau to create Starry Night with a bunch of circles, right? So I give this to you just as an example, as something to hopefully sort of inspire you. I mean, again, as I said before, you can do anything in Tableau if we just figure out those coordinates and we can draw some really cool things like that. All right. Slide siding number 2. If you didn't catch it the first time, here's another opportunity, all right? I see somebody taking a picture, all right. All right, so let me just quickly talk about what we call the Tableau Twins 3 pillars of custom charts in Tableau. And we've already talked about 2 of these, and we'll get to the third one in a little bit more detail in a moment. So plotting those x and y coordinates, it's the absolute foundation that we build upon. From there, we use the math. We use the trig and the geometry to sort of automate those calculations so that we can create more automated visualizations. And then the third is data densification. And again, I'll get into that in a little bit more detail later on. At this point, I'm going to switch it over to Kevin, and he is going to show you how to build a radial bar chart in Tableau.
All right, the famous radial bar chart. So radial bar chart is basically a bar chart wrapped around a circle. Now, a regular bar chart's typically a better chart for most use cases, but when you're implementing things like direction or sometimes time series, or even when you have space requirements, a radial bar chart can be handy. So a good example, this is from my friend Kasha. She visualized baby names over time. Another one from Roddy Zakovich, my favorite radial bar chart of all time, by the way, right here. And he visualized every Boston Red Sox season. But the reason we're going to really dig into the radial bar chart is because it brings in all the different fundamentals we need to build non-standard chart types. And those are things like duplicating your data, using table calculations, using the path card, and my favorite, trigonometry. I see some smiles over here. Thank you. All right, so we're going to go back to high school math and talk about trigonometry. But trigonometry is not that bad. I just like to call it triangle math because it's all it is. It's the math of right triangles, basically. So we'll try and simplify it, keep it really simple, and not drag you guys down too much, okay? So the parts of a right triangle, we have the right angle, we have an angle, we have it labeled as theta. We have the side, the adjacent side. That's the one closest to the angle. I'll call it theta. The side that's opposite is called the opposite, and the one that connects the two is the hypotenuse. The nice thing about a right triangle is that if we know any 2 parts, we can calculate the other 2 parts. So in this case, we have an angle of 40 degrees. The length of our hypotenuse is 10. We can calculate the length of the adjacent and the length of the opposite. Why does that matter? Well, let's plot a circle on an XY axis at center point 0, 0, and let's fit a right triangle in there, okay? So we have the angle, but what you'll notice is the hypotenuse of this triangle is equal to the radius of the circle, okay? And then we're on an XY axis, that adjacent side, the length of that adjacent side is equal to our X value, Length of the opposite side is our y value. You can see where we're going with it. When we have an x and a y, we can make a point, okay? We can calculate those x and y's if we have the angle and the radius by cosine and sine. Cosine of the angle times the radius is the x value. Sine of the angle times the radius is the y value. Now, we have a point. Let's draw another right triangle. This has the exact same radius, but a different angle. We get another point, and another point, and another point. If we do that enough times, we have enough points to actually draw a circle. And since we know there's 360 degrees in a circle, we can calculate what the incremental change is from each point. So, for example, 36 points, you're going to have 10 degrees between each point. Okay. Slide sighting number 3. If you missed it, we'll go again. All right. Don't take notes. Now, trigonometry. People are like, oh, gosh, I hope this doesn't continue this way. Well, it is a little, but I just wanted to say that this is a super special day for me. First time presenting at a Tableau conference. First time presenting with my identical twin brother on any topic. So, thank you. But like so many people do at Tableau conference, we want to commemorate it with a selfie, and we want you guys to be part of it. So if you don't mind, can you take it? All right. We're going to get a selfie with you guys. Cool? All right. Act like you have. Yeah, there we go. That's what we need. All right. Smile. Cheese. All right. All right. We figured that's a good way to take a break from the heavy trig, okay? All right. Now the radial bar chart. So we are going to look at Superstore data. We're going to look at 36 months, and each of those bars is going to represent 1 month. And it's going to represent, the length of it is going to represent the sum of sales for that given month. So let's kind of break this down. Let's take size off of that pretty little bar chart. Let's take the color off, and let's accentuate the points, okay? So what you're going to notice is we have this inner ring of points, and it draws a circle just like we showed before. And then we have an outer ring of points, okay? We have a line that connects those 2 points, and that represents the sum of sales for a given month. So we have August 2015, September 2015. Higher sales in August than in September. Again, I'll repeat it. We have an inner point and an outer point for every month, and a line connecting them that equals the sum of sales, okay? Great. We zoom in, we're going to do something we just did. We're going to add a right triangle in there. So we have a right triangle that's fitted into that inner ring of points. And in this case, the hypotenuse of that right triangle is equal to the radius. Now, we also have this outer ring of points. Well, we can do the same exact thing. We can use a right triangle to calculate the outer ring of points. And that's just going to be that inner radius plus the sum of sales, right? Inner radius, and then the inner radius plus the sum of sales. Okay. All right. Tableau time, right? We're going to move over to desktop. We're going to actually build this guy. See my screen? We good? All right. So again, like I said, we have 36 months. We're looking at the sum of sales. And how I like to start out building these charts is to build it with a table. So we can actually see what our calculations are doing. So I have a table here that has the month and year. We have the sum of sales. And I've added a calculation called index. Now, index is typically used to number our rows, and that comes in handy, and we'll show that in a minute. But right now you can see index is not doing a good job of numbering our rows because we got a bunch of ones. So we need to set, well, let me first show you the index function. So index is just index, open, close parentheses. That's all it is. But now we need to set index to actually number our rows, and how we do that is to tell it how to compute. So if we go to index, set compute using month and year, we'll now number our rows. And that's going to come in very handy in a moment. So I said before, if we can figure out the angle and the radius, we can calculate all the XY coordinates we need, right? So, and I should take one step back and tell you that we're going to start off by just drawing the circle, the inner ring first, and then we'll expand and draw the whole thing. So let's go ahead and calculate our angle. So I've hard-coded this. I would never do this in real life, but so we know there's 360 degrees in a circle. We got 36 months, 360 divided by 36, that gives us 10 degrees. So I'm going to put that on my view. Now, we don't want every single right triangle to be plotted with a 10-degree angle because they would all be on top of each other. So 10 degrees is really how we're going to increment them. We really want them to be 10 degrees, 20 degrees, 30 degrees. And how we do that is using index. So we have 10 degrees in our angle increment, and we have index of 1, 2, 3. So if we multiply index by our angle, we will get this sort of unique angle. So angle in degrees times index. That's going to give us our 10, 20, 30, all the way up to 360 degrees, okay? Now, the one thing you should always know, Tableau does not like degrees, so you need to convert it over to radians. So it's just the radians of the angle in degrees, and you will have radians running from 0 to 2 pi. So 360 degrees in a circle, 2 pi in a radians in a circle, okay. We have one piece, we have the angle, now we need the radius. Cool thing about a radial bar chart is that inner radius is meaningless. It can be as big or as small as you want it to. So typically in those situations, I think a lot of us would create a parameter. That's what I did. Set it to 25,000. Create a calculation that was just equal to that parameter. And we have a 25,000 length radius for all of our points. So we have all the information we need to calculate the x and y coordinates. We have the angle. We have the radius. We can use sine and cosine to calculate the x and y coordinates. So we'll show that very simply. Cosine of the angle times the radius. And then for y, we have sine of the angle times the radius. So should we build it? We're going to build a circle in Tableau. All right. We're going to drag the x-coordinate to columns, the y-coordinate to rows, and you'll see, like Ken showed before, it just aggregates that up to 1 point. So we really need 36 points. 36 months, we want 36 points to draw our circle. So we need to break that out using something. We're going to do that using the month and year. So I'm going to put that under detail, and I'm going to change that to month and year, and absolutely nothing happens. It's not a mistake. It's on purpose. The x and y coordinates use index, the table calculation. So just like we did before, just like we had to set index to compute using, we need to do the same thing for our x and y coordinates. And we do it in the exact same way. Compute using month and year, you'll start to see something happen. Compute using month and year, and bravo, haha, we got a circle in Tableau. Now, we want to build the whole thing. So what I showed you before is we have two different things. Now, we have 36 points to make the inner ring of points, and we have 36 points to make these outer ring of points. So if we have 36 months, and we're already using that month, that value, to draw the inner ring, how are we going to draw the outer ring? We have somebody answer. You want to join us up on stage, Lindsay? We're going to duplicate our data, right? So everybody's probably done this. We're using the orders table. All we're going to do is take orders, drag it right below, and we're going to drop to union it. Now, I've already done that. We'll show you that union. Might be a little small, but basically you see two tables there, orders and orders $, right? Our first table, our union table, right? So what we're going to do is use those two different tables to draw 36 points for the inner ring and 36 points for the outer ring. So the first table, the orders table, we're going to use to draw the inner ring. The orders $, we're going to use to draw the outer ring, okay? And let's get in there. We're going to go back to this table. I'm going to drop some things off that we don't care about. Okay. So we are going to now create a calculation called radius adjusted. The angles are exactly the same. We're not going to have to do anything different for the angles because they just extend out. So what we need to do is draw the inner points and the outer points all at the same time. So like I said, for the inner ring, we're going to use just the orders table. So if the table name, and to be clear, when you do a union, Tableau automatically creates the table name calculation and basically just lists those two tables, orders and orders $. So if the table name equals orders, we're just going to use the radius, and that's going to be for the inner ring of points. Now, if the table name doesn't equal to orders, means it equals orders $, right? Then we're going to use the radius plus the sum of sales, so that point extends outward. And from here, really, the math is exactly the same. We've got the angle. We have this new radius adjusted. So we're going to create new x and y coordinates. Cosine of the angle in radians times the radius adjusted, and the y coordinate is just the sine. So let's build this full radial bar chart. Just like before, I'm going to drag this x coordinate calculation on the columns and the y on the rows. It's going to aggregate up. We need to break it out by month and year, just like before. We'll put that on detail. Oh, we don't want ship mode on detail. That would not help. Month and year on detail. Let's set that to month and year. Again, just like before, we'll set it to compute using month and year. And we're close. But one thing you'll see is there's no inner ring of points, right? So I said we need 36 points for the inner ring, 36 points for the outer ring. And if you look down here at the bottom, we have only 36 marks. We need 72 marks. How we're going to do that is we're going to blow it up again using table name. So where's table name at? We put that on detail. We see things happening. Make that a little, I hate squish circles. They look silly, so we've got to get that right. And if you change this to a line, we have a radial bar chart. Now, typically, you need to tell Tableau how to draw those lines. I happen to do it in the exact perfect way, and Tableau knew exactly how to draw the lines. But we want Tableau to draw a line from that inner point to the outer point for every single one of our months. So how we typically do that is using the path card. So, and we'll do this in a minute, so this is why I want to show you. So if I drag table name over to the path, that will basically tell them to draw a line from the inner point to the outer point, okay? With a little bit of cleanup, some size, some color, we have a nice, beautiful radial bar chart. And an example of a good use case for a radial bar chart. Last year at the conference, I don't know, I think Ken was in the Zen garden, somebody approached him and said, hey, I really have the need at work to visualize speed, wind direction, speed, and frequency all at the same time. So what Ken built sitting at that table with that gentleman, he built a radial bar chart because it has this direction piece to it. So this is a little different. This is not exactly a radial bar chart, but it really built on the foundations of a radial bar chart. Okay. Good? All right. The next thing we're going to build is a radar chart. So a radar chart is a chart that allows you to measure multiple variables at one time. It's usually used for ranks and scores, all where you're measured on the same scale. So a scale of 1 to 10 or a percentage scale. All the measurements are made from the center of that little kind of circular thing. So the further you go out from the center, the higher the value. The less you go out from the center, the lower the value. Now, again, a lot of people may argue that bar charts are better, but the real big advantage to a radar chart is the fact that you can stack them on top of each other and really make some really nice comparisons. So one example is, well, mine. I did this about a month ago, and I won't get into the details about what it is, but you can see how easy it is to compare the yellow versus the green. This is actually me versus Robert Rouse. Robert Rouse is very much smarter than me, just so you know. That's why he's got a bigger green. And they have another example, and this is actually used in the FIFA World Cup video game. They measure different players' skills using a radar chart. This is by Fuad Ahmed from the Information Lab, and just a beautiful radar chart. Before we actually build a radar chart, I want to talk about regular polygons. Now, regular polygons are equilateral shapes, so an equilateral triangle, for example, or a square, pentagon, hexagon, right? Those are equilateral, those are regular polygons. And the nice thing about a regular polygon is that if you plot it on a circle, the points of the polygon intersect the circle, right? So if I make that larger, or more points, you'll continue to see every single one of those points intersect the circle. So what that means for us is if we can draw a circle like we did before, we can draw polygons, regular polygons like we did before. The same exact math using cosine and sine and x and y coordinates, da, da, da. Now, the cool thing is if we increase these points, what you're going to see is we get really close to drawing a circle. In fact, you never actually draw curves in Tableau. You just draw enough points connected by straight lines that you estimate a circle, right? So you can kind of see how that's working. Now, what if we don't have an equal radius? You can see all these are extending all the way out. What if we have varying radii, radiuses I'll call it? Then you get these kind of odd shapes. You see this is a smaller radius than this over here, and this is the largest. So add a few more points, we kind of start to get these very odd shapes. What you're looking at here is the definition of a radar chart, okay? All right. So we are going to build a radar chart by Ellen Blackburn. Makeover Monday folks should recognize this. It's from Makeover Monday last year. It was beautiful. She has like 10 of them stacked on top of each other, and you can filter them down. We're going to just build this radar chart for the boxing. So what they looked at was, what's the toughest sport? And it took some panelists basically took 10 skills, and they ranked them. And then Ellen did a beautiful job putting that on a radar chart. So we're going to build that today. The data is pretty simple. We have sport, we have 10 skills, and we have a score for each. All right. Just like before, I am going to start off with a table. So we have our skills, we have our scores, and I went ahead and cheated and hit set index to compute using the skill. Okay? So we have our rows numbered exactly like we need to. So just like before, we need to figure out the angle and the radius to calculate those x and y coordinates. Now, I'm going to skip the angle for a moment, and we'll just look at the radius. The radius is just the score. We're going to extend out from a center point of 0, 0, and the length of that value is just equal to the score. So the length of our radius is the score. So I have just a radius here. It's going to be equivalent to the score. Okay? So that just equals the score. Now, we need to calculate our angle. We did it in 3 steps before. We're going to do it in 1 this time. 360 degrees divided by a fixed LOD, counting the number of skills, multiply index, wrap all the thing around with some radians, and we now have our angle in radians. Just to confirm we have it right, we see our angles running from 0 to 2 pi. Okay? So, just like before, we have our angle, we have our radius. We can now calculate the x and y coordinates. We'll edit that. Cosine of the angle times the radius, and the y coordinate is just sine of the angle times the radius. So let's build a radar chart. You can see a lot of similar steps here today. So x coordinate on columns, y coordinate on rows. We want to break out that 1 point by what? Skill. Put that on detail. Come up here, set it to compute using skill. Compute using skill. And then we turn it to a polygon, and voila, we hit. Looks like it broke. This is going to come back to what we were talking about before. And in fact, I'll show you what's happening. I'll change this to a line. Tableau doesn't know how to draw this line. Tableau decides to make it about as hard as possible and go doot, 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 right? So we want it to kind of draw the line all the way around. So we're going to use that path card that we talked about before. Now, we could use index to, say, draw a point from point 1 to point 2 to point 3 to point 4, or we could use skill. So if I put skill on the path, you'll see that line change. We change this thing to a polygon. We change the transparency. We plot it on a background image, or I've actually, in my one, I actually drew that background image in Tableau, and we have a radar chart. All right, so we did a radial bar chart, we did a radar chart. I am going to now pass it over to Ken. He is going to talk about everybody's favorite chart, the Sankey diagram.
All right. Who's built a Sankey before? All right. Who wants to learn how to build a Sankey? All right. Who doesn't know what a Sankey is? All right. Well, I'll be quick about explaining what it is since most people know. So, Sankey chart. Here's a simple example from my work at Bucknell. So we looked at students and what they majored in, what they graduated with in their degree, and we looked at what industries they were working in. So this is a simplified version that just looks at biology and chemistry students. And of course, the bars on the left sort of show the number of students that majored in each of those subjects. And then on the right, it's the number that are working in that industry. And then these flows in the middle show the number of students that are sort of connected to each. So we can see a big chunk of our biology students, not surprisingly, ended up working in health and medicine. So let's break this down into a little bit, break this down a little bit further. So here's a really simple one. I've just made it source 1, source 2, and target 1 and target 2. And I want to show you sort of the different components of this Sankey and how it works. So first of all, we have these bars. They're kind of just like stacked bar charts, essentially. We actually use a Gantt chart for this, but basically it's a stacked bar chart, and they're sized by the number of students in this case. Then we have these curves, these flows that show that flow of students from major to industry. So let's take apart this curve as well. So we have the top curve. So if we can sort of draw that top curve here, and we also have this bottom curve, then we just connect them. So if we were using a line mark type, we would connect them just like this, right? But in Tableau, we can just switch it to a polygon, and we're able to get this nice closed flow. Of course, we layer in all the other polygons, and we get that Sankey. So the real key here is if we can figure out each of these points, and I'm not going to go into detail on how you find these points, but if we can figure out these points, we just need to be able to connect them with a curve, and then we can draw the bottom curve and connect them and turn them into a polygon. Does that make sense? All right, so I'm gonna start out with a really simple example. So I've taken, I have a data set here. I've got point A and point B. I've got my X and Y coordinates, and I've basically just plotted them in Tableau like this. So what I want to do is connect these with a curve. I'm going to start off with a simpler use case and just connect them with a straight line. So how do we do that in Tableau? Anybody? Just to connect them with a line, just change the mark type, right? We can just change the line, change it to a line. But to show you the concepts here, I want to actually use something called data densification to draw this line. So data densification is a big topic, a broad topic. There's some great videos out there by Joe Mako. There was a great presentation by Jonathan Drummy this week. So take a look at those. It encompasses way more than what we're talking about here today. But for the sake of what I'm doing here today, data densification is really sort of artificially creating extra rows in our data so that we can draw something more complex. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So what I want to do is I want to draw 5 different points along this line and connect them together. So if I had 5 points, I want my first one to start at 0, my last one to start at 1 on my x coordinate, and then I'll have them sort of equally spaced in between. So the second one will be at 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, and 1. So to do that, I've created an extra data set here. It's just a single column called extra point with 5 records, just numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So in Tableau, what I'm going to do is create a new data source. I'm going to connect to this spreadsheet, pull in my data. So there's my points A and B. I'm going to pull in my densified points. I'm going to use something called a cross join. Cross join or a Cartesian join basically takes every record in the first data set and combines it with every record in the second. And we can do, it's not a default join type, but we can fake it by putting a 1 in a join calculation on both sides. So you can see here we now have 5 points for A, 5 points for B, and all of our extra points here. All right? So we now need to create some calculations to build this. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to create a fixed LOD that basically just gives me the number of points. I could hard code this, but I want to make this flexible so that I could have a different number of points at any given time. So just fixed max of extra points. Then I want to figure out that spacing along the x-axis. As I said before, it's basically 0.25 in this case. But again, we want to automate this calculation. So 1 divided by the max points minus 1. In this case, it's 5 points. 1 divided by 4 is 0.25. Then we're going to figure out our x-coordinate. So again, we're just evenly spacing this. So I'm going to take that extra point, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to subtract 1 and multiply it by the spacing. So point number 1 is 1 minus 1, which is 0 times 0.25, gives us that starting point of 0. Second point is 2 minus 1 times 0.25, which is 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, and 1, right? So a key thing I want to note here is that lines as well as curves, they all can be described by a mathematical equation. So lines usually have sort of simple equations. This line is super simple. It's just y equals 1x or y equals x. So to get my y coordinates, it's just as simple as just setting it to the value of my x coordinate. Now, if I then take the straight x and straight y and plot them, I get something like this. So we can see we have those evenly spaced points using data densification. So we've just used data densification to draw a line. Of course, that's totally pointless because we don't need to draw a line with data densification in Tableau. However, Tableau cannot connect points with a curve yet. Maybe someday? So we have to use this to sort of find those points along the line and connect them in order to create that curve. So the formula for a sigmoid curve, I'm going to use a sigmoid curve. You can use lots of other curves. Sine curves tend to actually be better than sine curves, but there's a variety of different curves we can use. We'll use a sigmoid for this one since that's heavily used in Sankeys. So here's the formula. It doesn't really matter. It's a little bit complex. All we need to do is be able to translate this into a Tableau calculated field. So let's create these calculated fields. So we're going to use max points again. We're going to use x spacing just like we did before. But we're going to create a couple of new calculated fields. So first of all is our sigmoid x. I won't go into a lot of detail on this, but in order to get a nice smooth curve, you generally have to point, at least with a sigmoid, you have to plot those x coordinates from -6 to 6. So I'm just sort of creating a fake value that I can plug into my formula to get the y. Other curves have different ranges that are ideal. But here you can see that I've basically turned this formula into a calculated field in order to get my y value. All right, so now when we plot that in Tableau, we're going to get a beautiful curve. Not very curvy, is it? Oh, anyone know what the problem is? Not enough points, right? So as Kevin said before, we're never drawing curves in Tableau. All we're doing is plotting enough points that we can connect with straight lines. And if we draw enough of them, our eyes can't really tell the difference between that and a true curve, right? So also in my data set, I've just added a few more points. I got 12, so let's see what 12 points looks like. So that's with 12 points, certainly looking more curvy, but also a bit blocky, so maybe that's not enough. So let's do 50 points. So here's 50 points, and let me get rid of these circles, and that does look pretty smooth, right? All right. So one of the questions I get a lot is why 50 points? Kevin's boss, Jeff Schaefer, a Zen master who was one of the first people to build a Sankey in Tableau, uses 49 points, and he gets that question a lot. The only answer is it's what you need to get a nice smooth curve. You know, 40 seems like not enough, and 60 is too many. But depending on your form factor, if you're building something for, say, a mobile phone, you might be able to get away with fewer points. If you had a big high-resolution screen, you might need more points. So it's really just a matter of making sure that you plotted enough to get a smooth curve, but not so many because it just makes Tableau have to work a little bit harder, right? So let's bring this back to a Sankey. So again, our goal in the Sankey was to draw these curves to connect these points. So I've just shown you how to connect 2 points with a curve, right? So if we can find these 2 points, or these 2 sets of points, we can use data densification to draw these lines, turn them into a polygon, do all the rest of the curves, and we have a Sankey. So You don't have to clap. So there's a lot more to it, but basically, you know, what I hope is I can have at least showed you the basics of how you build a Sankey, but also along the way, how do you draw these curves? How do you draw circles? How do you draw sigmoid curves, sine curves? They all use these same basic concepts of using data densification. And so just to give you a couple examples, here's an example by Jeff Schaefer showing Myers-Briggs. I believe this was a Makeover Monday too, if I'm not mistaken. We have one from Yvette Kovac that shows the job application process, so you can kind of see how candidates drop off of that over time. All right. And one thing I just want to point out is that, you know, these are hard to build. And we wanted to go through the process of showing you how to build one because the concepts are important to building custom charts, as we have said before. But if you do need to build a Sankey, I've also made a bunch of templates available on my website. They're meant to be plug and play. You download a spreadsheet, you plug your data in, you connect it to the workbook, and you can build a Sankey really quickly. And there's a number of different styles and multi-level and, you know, some crazy things like a gradient on there as well. So this is all referenced in the blog post that we mentioned before. That being said, data densification is not just used for drawing curves. You can use it for a number of other things. So here's an example, is a waffle chart. I'm not sure what the deal is with the title there, but a waffle chart uses basically a data densification process to create these 100 different boxes. Another example, this one from Jeff Schaefer as well, is a unit bar chart. And it's sort of like a waffle chart, just in a bar chart sort of fashion as well. So all these use data densification, and you'll see lots and lots of other really cool use cases for data densification as you're looking around on Tableau or Tableau Public. All right, so we're going to wrap this up here quickly, but before we do that, we're going to show you a couple of examples we really loved. Real quickly, just to give you, just sort of whet your appetite on some of these things. So here's an arc chart by James Smith, which I think is really quite beautiful. Adam McCann has created these gauge charts, so this uses trigonometry to figure out how to draw those lines, sort of like the Radial Bar Chart that Kevin showed before. A sigmoid or a curvy bump chart by Roddy Zakovich. Kevin actually has a template on his website for creating these very quickly and easily. A coxcomb chart from Harpreet Guman. This is pretty similar to the windrose chart that we showed before. It's just sort of a radial bar chart, but in a polygon sort of fashion. Curvy timeline by Adam Green. I actually innovated this technique. It allows you to sort of squish your timeline a little bit easier than doing something vertically or horizontally. Again, there's a template on my website for this. Beautiful one by Alex Jones. It shows a stream graph on the bottom left as well as a sunburst chart on the top right. Again, all using these same techniques. We've really been heavy on Jeff Schaefer. Are you sucking up or something like that? Jeez. Maybe. This one by Jeff Schaefer uses trigonometry on a map to sort of zoom in or zoom out on a specific radius. So again, this is just circle math.
It looks like this may be rendered useless here soon, I hear.
Yeah.
So.
All right, so every one of those use these three basic pillars that we've been talking about, right? So let's just recap those quickly. First is figuring out those x and y coordinates. You have to do that that's sort of the key of all of this, is figuring out those x and y coordinates so you can then build something more complex. Automating that through the trigonometry that Kevin showed, through geometry, through, there's other math that you can use in this as well. And then, of course, data densification in order to draw those things that are a little bit more complex that might need those extra points to draw something curvy or something else along those lines. One last shot in case you didn't get it. All right, see one? All right, one more. All right. So before we wrap, and we're kind of getting tight on time, so we're not going to actually have time for public questions, but Kevin and I will be here after. So if you have questions or just want to meet or get a business card or whatever, come up and say hello and ask your questions. Otherwise, when we get to the question section, you're free to go. But I want to make sure that I mention the Tableau chart catalog, and Sean mentioned this earlier. So Kevin created this a few months ago. It shows 100 different charts, all built in Tableau, 100 different chart types, all built in Tableau, all built by 74 different Tableau authors. If you click on them, it'll take you to Tableau Public. You can download them, take them apart, see how they've built those, and it's a really, really incredible resource to get inspiration as well as to learn how to build some of these custom chart types. That's the one that got him 450 favorites or something like that. Right?
Got me to get on his tail.
Yeah. All right, so the obligatory survey slide, it does really help us. A lot of what we've built into this came from feedback from a presentation that I did with Matt Chambers last year, where people wanted to learn more in depth how to do these things. So this does really help us. If we fill out the survey, we'd appreciate it. And we, again, not going to take public questions, but feel free to come up if you'd like to chat, meet us, or ask us any questions. We will be here for a little while, or as long as we need. Until they kick us out, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Thank you.